So y'all are live right now.
Okay.
All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome this evening to an event sponsored by the Islamic Society of Greater Houston. My name is Taqwaa Azur. I am a resident here in Houston, Texas of 16 years. You'll be joining us this evening on a hot topic that we have been dealing with as a nation and as a community for the past week and a half now. And it's regarding the issue of George Floyd and overall the matter of racism in our nation. But specifically this evening, we're going to dig a little bit deeper and talk about racism in the Muslim community. We have a lovely panel this evening, very prominent individuals who are on the front lines of this particular topic and who are on the front lines of the religion in general and as a whole. So this evening we'll be welcoming Sheikh Daniel Hernandez. He is the Imam here in the Houston area, the Imam of the Pearland Islamic Center. He is from New York originally, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. He is of Latino and Puerto Rican descent. He studied at Al-Azhar Islamic University, and he has attained a master's degree in Islamic studies. Welcome, Sheikh Daniel. Thank you for joining us this evening. We also have Imam Dawud Walid, who is currently the executive director of the Michigan chapter of the Council of Islamic Relations in Michigan. He is also on the front lines of civil rights. He has authored various articles. You hear him speaking on various lectures, and he is an asset to the community. I've listened to you personally myself, Sheikh Dawood, and I am very impressed and always interested in your talks. Thank you this evening, Sheikh Dawood. Also, we have Sister Lubabah Abdullah. Sister Lubabah is a prominent attorney. She is a mother who has worked very hard in the community regarding community activism and civil rights issues. She is a gem and an asset to our community, and we'd like to welcome you as well, Sister Lubabah. Thank you all for having the time and the energy to join us regarding this very important and critical topic. Before we get into everything and we start addressing some of the questions that we have, I was asked to just briefly talk about my personal experience regarding the issue. Mashallah, I've been Muslim for approximately 19 years now. And I come from the Midwest, originally from Cleveland, Ohio. And Cleveland, Ohio is a very segregated city, whereas most people who are white are on one side of the city and Black on the other side of the city. And coming from this kind of community, you'd expect that I'd have to encounter much racism, but alhamdulillah, that was not my issue. It was not until, and I say this all the time, it was not until I embraced Islam where I dealt with racism. And it was not until I was a Muslim and had two obviously Black boys where I dealt with racism. And it was not at the hands of people outside of Islam. This was at the hands of other Muslims in our community. So I won't go too far into that conversation, but we need to be very well aware that this is something that we have to address in our community before we can go out and protest and talk about how we can help as a collective nation until we take care of our own household affairs. I know probably every one of us who are part of a marginalized community have dealt with it in some form or another, but I've spoken about it several times on my platform regarding Facebook and things of that nature, but it's a sensitive topic and not all the time are we ready to address it. So we need to be able to, move forward in a way where the issues are properly addressed and we can get some resolutions in our community sometime soon, hopefully within our lifetime, inshallah. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and meet with our panelists. Imam Daniel, if you wouldn't mind I'm sorry, we're starting with Sheikh Dawood. We'll start with Sheikh Dawood. Sheikh Dawood, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and beginning our topic this evening and sharing your thoughts and concerns regarding the issue this evening.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء. It's an important conversation, and for those of you who know anything about the work that I've for any of you who know about the work that I've been involved in over the years outside of care, one of the issues that I've always talked about very publicly is the issue of dealing with intra-Muslim racism. As a matter of fact, what sparked Sidi Ahmed Mubarak and myself to write the first volume of Centering Black Narrative, Black Muslim Nobles Amongst the Early Pious Muslims. We wrote 2 books about this, was in relationship to anti-Black racism that we were finding inside of the Muslim community itself, and which sparked us to write this book. One, as a type of balm or a type of healing for Muslims who are Black, who feel marginalized in the community, including the narrative of how Islam is presented, not even just in the United States of America, but even in terms of Islamic civilization, in which we rarely hear about prolific polymaths and scholars that come from Africa, and even when we talk about certain things that even, it's almost as if no scholars ever existed from Habasha or from West Africa, almost, right? So this was part of like why we wrote this book. The second reason is to try to raise the awareness of non-Black Muslims about the issue, about how racism and also unintentional slights take place in our community, and of course the former is easier to fix than the latter, because when people do certain slights or certain things, maybe unintentionally without ill will, or sometimes it's out of not knowing, or what is called jahl basit, this is easier to fix. But when someone has jahl murakkab, when they have intense ingrained ignorance, when they have spiritual diseases that are completely overtaken their heart, such as kibr, which is one of the spiritual diseases that informs racism, arrogance, right? When someone's at that level, then really it's not much that can be done for that person as far as talking or dealing with that person when they get to a level of that really intense racism that has overtaken themselves, when they are inner fir'aun, their nafs is basically controlling them. So let me say this from the start, and I have so many stories about dealing with this issue, both overtly and subtly, being here and being in the so-called Middle East. But let me tell you a story about this year, because this, I've heard this often. So I gave the khutbah in a masjid in Baltimore area, and it was during the month of Muharram, and I was talking about the oppression of the Bani Israel under Fir'aun. And I also talked about the tragedy of Sayyidina Hussein ibn Ali anhuma, and his massacre, and the massacre of the Ahlul Bayt at Karbala. So I was talking about this, and I talked about this issue, and I mentioned the issue of how there's systemic racism that was in Egypt relating to the Bani Israel. And there was a level of tribalism that crept back up in the Muslim community very early with Bani Umayyah against Bani Hashim. So I talked about this, and then I had an uncle come to me after the khutbah and said, well, brother, you don't need, you need to talk about racism, because we have Bilal, and when the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had Bilal call the adhan on top of the Kaaba, the issue was solved. So no need to come in the community and talk about racism, which I told this uncle very respectfully. Islam has no racism, but just like ghiba, backbiting, and namima, slanderous gossip, are prohibited in Islam, but you have Muslims that slander and backbite all the time, every day, then likewise, we have racist Muslims. So yeah, Islam is against racism, but that doesn't mean that we're in some sort of post-racial reality. And this really strikes at the heart of the matter. And I don't want to take too much time, because I really want to hear what Sheikh Daniel has to say, and also our sister Lubabah in the Q&A, which I think maybe will be more fruitful than anything that I have to say in the starting off. But the conversation for us is so difficult to talk about race in our community, right? It's a difficult issue. And especially it's become even more difficult after 9/11, because our community has felt under siege because of increasement of Islamophobia and xenophobia. And we've had these hate crimes that increase exponentially, that weren't taking place against Muslims to such a degree just in 2000, right? And the Islamophobia network, and then you have Donald Trump's Muslim travel ban, and all these things, right? And the cottage industry of Islamophobes, from Fox to certain politicians who've actually fundraised off of anti-Muslim bigotry. So many of us feel like we're an embattled community. So we feel like we're a community that's mazluma, right? That we're an oppressed group of people, right? And we have been wrong. But let me say to the Muslims watching, that you can be mazlum and zalim at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. One can be oppressed and be subjected to anti-Muslim bigotry or anti-Muslim hate or anti-Arab hate or anti-South Asian hate, and still yourself do wrong to other people. Just because one has been subjected to bias doesn't make them bias-free in their actions. So let's get that straight. And let me also say, the Sahaba had to deal with this issue, the best generation, right? So if they had to deal with the issue, if our own mothers dealt with this issue, Ummahatul Mu'mineen, may Allah be pleased with the mothers of the believers. If we have stories in our Tafasir Quran, which relates to an ayah being revealed, of saying, let not women make fun of other women, perhaps they are better than you, because one wife of the Prophet, who was Arabiya and from Quraysh, made fun of Mu'mineen Safiya with racism, because of all the wives of the Prophet, alayhi salam, all of them were Arabiyat except for Safiya, who came from a Jewish tribe. One of our own mothers called Mu'mineen Safiya Yahudiya bint Yahudiyin, Jew girl, daughter of the Jews, right? So if the Sahaba had to wrestle with this issue and be purified with it, who do we think we are? Our Islam is so far removed from the Sahaba. And I'm not even talking about as far as outwardly, I'm talking about the ahwal, or the spiritual states of their zuhud and detachment of the dunya, and not seeking to be accepted by people outside themselves. How many of us crave to be accepted by the dominant culture, right? They didn't even have that issue like how we have this issue, right? So this is one thing I have to say. The other thing I have to say is that, and it's true that when we talk about anti-Black racism, and alhamdulillah, I'm glad to see there's some much more interest about it right now in the community, because when some of us brought this up when we had the Muslims for Ferguson coalition years ago after Mike Brown, I literally had people in the community tell me off, talking about, why are you standing up? This is not an Islamic issue. He was a kafir. Why are you even dealing with that, Imam? Why don't you spend your time on Philistine? What's why are you even dealing with that with those kuffar? Why are you trying to organize marching with kuffar out in Ferguson? I heard this. right? So we have interest now in this issue. Alhamdulillah, it's a topic. I'm glad so many masajid and organizations are talking about it. I'm talking about 4 or 5 times a day on Zoom and Facebook right about now. But even with the issue of dealing with Islamophobia, I say this with all sincerity, and this is the internal work we have to do, right? Is that we do have solutions as Muslims. Islam has solutions. And we Muslims, we are a vessel for Islam going out to the public. So if I can make an analogy, Islam is like pure water, right? But if that pure water is being poured into a cup that's filled with the pus of spiritual diseases of racism based upon arrogance, based upon pride, based upon greed, based upon envy, based upon materialism. If that pure water of Islam is being filled into a community cup that is struggling with its own spiritual maladies, then what do you think we're going to do when we try to pass that cup to the broader society? You think they're going to drink that cup? And if they do drink from the cup, do you think that cup is going to help quench their thirst and make them better? I mean, that water, if the cup is filthy? So we have our own work to do simultaneously, that as we are trying to address broader problems, we have to deal with this ourselves. And I mentioned some of these spiritual remedies. Some of these spiritual diseases. Now, just very briefly, this is from the macro level, and I've said this for a number of years, and I'm not sure if Sheikh Daniel agrees with me or not, but I've seen this over the years and going back to the 90s, that this is just generally speaking how we purify ourselves generally from some of these spiritual diseases, which racism is a manifestation of spiritual diseases, right? It's not just something purely secular or purely social, political. It starts from the inside, right? From spiritual diseases. That we as Muslims sometimes, we focus so much on aqidah and fiqh in our studies that the third part of tazkiyah, we don't spend equal time with. Many of our du'at don't spend equal time about that in our preaching, to talk about spiritual diseases and remedies, and our durus, to talk about tazkiyah or tasawwuf, whatever word you want, or ihsan, right? That's something that's been neglected. So we can come up with all of the socio-political strategies of woke organizing and getting down all this language. But if we're not dealing with ourselves on a very profound and systematic spiritual level of seeing spiritual doctors, of dealing with these issues of purifying ourselves from spiritual remedies, then the organizing in of itself, or the lobbying in of itself, is not going to be very effective. And that starts with organizing within ourselves as a Muslim community before we even go to the outside. And then the other point that I would like to make is that the seerah gives a lot of help for us, a critical study of the seerah. One of these things is the brother and sisterhood compact that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam established when he went to Medina, pairing off an immigrant with an indigenous, or we say the Ansar, but they're indigenous, right? And then the immigrants that came from Mecca. Some of them first made a migration to Habasha, to Abyssinia first, then they came to El Medina. Some of them made hijratain, like Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, and he made hijratain, right? Or Uthman ibn Affan made 2 migrations, right? So how can we begin to set up a system, and starting with our youth, to try to break outside of our comfort zones, outside of our social economic silos between urban and suburban, between different people, different ethnic groups, that we can start having real meaningful relationships of people eating together, right? It's not just praying next to someone and you don't have a conversation with them, about breaking bread with someone, about having them play together on a basketball league. Sisters have their basketball team and brothers have theirs, or whatever activities, right? And a qiyamul layl at one masjid, and then all the youth from one area go to one masjid, and then the other ones get brought to another masjid. And they have transportation problems. We help them with their transportation problems. In Detroit, we have a major transportation problem issue that separates Muslim communities, right? And then also, of being careful that when we talk about relationships and marriage, and I'm being very specific right here, that we don't objectify Muslim women of certain ethnicities and treat her lesser than. Like look at the Latina. Oh, and ooh, and then brothers try to step the Latina, including there's Afro Latinas too, right? You want to step the Latina to a way that you would never dare step to your own women. Or you try to step to the Black woman, be she African American or be she Somali or Ethiopian, that you wouldn't step to your sister that way, but you think you can be cute and talk to that sister a certain way that you wouldn't talk to sisters in your ethnic group. And this can even get down to even the issue of mahar, and thinking that women are less deserving of a certain mahar based upon their skin color. I'm gonna keep it real with you. I'm gonna keep 100 with you, because I'm an imam in the community. I see it. I'm not holding any punches with you. So, right, so we have to keep it real if we're going to deal with these real issues. And we have some issues, Muslims, right? We have some issues. And so we have to address them. We have to be honest. But the first step to repentance and changing your ways is an-nadam, right? It's having some remorse. You recognize that you have an issue. That's the first step to recovery. You have to admit that there's a problem. Then you have remorse about it, and then you can go about the ways of fixing the problem. But if we don't think that we have a problem, then we're in trouble. We're in trouble because we have a problem. And with that, I'll close. I'm very curious to hear what the Sheikh says, and also Sister Lubabah. May Allah bless both of them.
Ameen. Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh Dawood. You touched on so many very profound points that are often in conversations among small circles, among dialogues, and on social media regarding the mahar, regarding breaking bread. And that was actually one of the conversations I had with someone earlier. They called asking about, how do I speak to my children about this issue? And one of the easiest things that I've always regarded to try to manage dealing with racism and stepping outside of your comfort zone, something as simple as breaking bread with somebody who's different than your regular circle. We think that that's not a big deal, but it goes a long way. I was listening to a lecture the other day, and they were saying, that's one of the most intimate things you can do with somebody is dine with them, break bread with them. And oftentimes we are among our own comfort zone, which is good and fine. But when that's your exclusive social circle, and you don't find any room to deal with anybody outside of your own ethnicity, then that's where the problem comes. You're not open to learn, you're not open to grow. We're in a society that's dominated by people who are different than most of the marginalized groups. So we have a little bit of everybody for the most part, as far as understanding who they are, because we have to go by the rules that they establish and things of that nature. But when it comes to us closing the gap in our own communities, we fall short, like you said. So Chef Daniel, if you wouldn't mind chiming in and sharing your thoughts regarding the issue, we greatly appreciate it. Inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sallam. In the name of Allah, may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon his final messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his companions, and all those who follow him until the day of judgment. Alhamdulillah, it's a great honor to be in a program alongside Imam Dawud Alhamdulillah. Last time I saw Imam Dawud in person was in 2008 when I visited Michigan at the Islamic American University for a Dawah program. So Alhamdulillah, it's a blessing to be together in this continuous work for the community, Alhamdulillah, and balancing between the service and the also the internal service of ourselves, Alhamdulillah. So I wanted to talk about the psychology of the Prophet ﷺ related to dawah and how he would take in consideration the people and the lands that he will send Sahabas to. So we look at and how the Prophet ﷺ, and I agree with Imam Dawud, where I have given khutbas in on. It was interesting. I gave a khutbah about showing gratitude to these to our those who struggled in the past in this country that paved the way for us to live the comfortable life that we live, right? And so I gave a khutbah talking about Cesar Chavez and Rosa Parks and Malcolm X, and people ask like, why do you talk about them when when they were Muslims? And so I brought it back to the point of that the Prophet ﷺ was not sent only for Muslims. As Allah says in the Quran, we look at matters through the lens of the Quran and the lens of the Sunnah. And that وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. And we didn't send you, O Muhammad, except as a mercy to all the worlds, not as a mercy to Muslims, not as a mercy to this ethnicity or that ethnicity, but as a mercy to all the worlds. So Islam has the ingredient to serve all humanity because it comes from Allah. We are the ones that sometimes shortchange it by choosing, cherry picking whatever feeds our desires, and go run with it and say this is Islam and this is, without going deeper into the matter. The Prophet ﷺ also said in a hadith called Musalsal bil Awwaliyah that the merciful will be shown mercy by the most merciful. Show mercy to all who are upon the earth, that the one who's in the heavens will have mercy on you. So this is part of our religion, for us to show our mercy and our compassion to all the worlds, regardless of where they're from. And subhanAllah, we're in this land of diversity, and we have to show that appreciation. The Prophet ﷺ, when he sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal to Yemen, he informed him that he was going to a people from Ahlul Kitab. So he gave him a heads up. You're going to this people. So talk to them about this, right? So it's important for us when we come to America, and when we're in America, we have to understand the realities of the people in America and all the different struggles, and how can we share the beauty of Islam with them and help them and deal with their reality, right? So in regards of showing gratitude to Martin Luther King Jr., showing gratitude to Carter Woodson, showing gratitude to Cesar Chavez, to all these who struggled selflessly for the people, we go back to the Prophet ﷺ. We said, La yashkurullah man la yashkurun nas. He does not thank Allah, who does not thank the people. And he didn't say who does not thank the believers. He didn't say who does not thank the Muslim. He said, La yashkurun nas, whoever doesn't thank the people in general. The people. So in our showing of gratitude is by one, knowing the history, knowing the struggle. How do we get so much ease without a struggle, right? And what did they experience? What hardships did they experience for the sake of the cause? Now, when we look at the reality that's happening. And yes, I you know, some of the points that Imam Dawud mentioned in regards of what happens with converts, and when they come into Islam, and sometimes they're preyed upon, and sometimes people, you know, immediately, like right after Shahada is, you want to get married, you know, are you married? You know, without no introduction whatsoever, and that occurs. But also we have, you know, the on the ground work. How do we really demonstrate that this message is relevant and can reach the people when we keep it within the four walls? When we serve our own in our masjid, and we very little, you know, we don't think much about outside. Now, for example, there was a masjid that happened to be in the inner city, and this masjid was serving the inner city. And then this masjid, they decided to build the masjid. And they built the masjid away from the inner city, away from the people, and just for themselves. And they shut down the other masjid. So therefore, the service that they were doing in the inner city, the people accepting Islam that really need Islam, they were wrong by the way of relocating the masjid to a different location that is away from their environment. Now, in this reality, we have to, it is not the time to say these rallies are wrong and these demonstrations are wrong. It is a time when all these people that are protesting, there are educated individuals in these rallies that are very well grounded in what's going on. So we can't say that everyone that's demonstrating is ignorant of the realities. Now, we, as I conclude, the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. And if he's unable, let him try to change it with his tongue. And if he's unable, let him change it with his heart. And that is the weakest of Iman. So we should enhance our knowledge of our deen and the lands that we live in and its history. And we should eradicate racism and discrimination from our own hearts, from our communities, from our homes. And we should demonstrate that we reject this discrimination by showing it in our inclusivity in our masajids, by showing it in our inclusivity in our administrations, right? And also, not we don't all have to speak, but we can all be involved by supporting those who are doing the work as well, by supporting organizations like MANA, supporting organizations like CARE, and just really, instead of reinventing the wheel, support the years of work that has been taking place in this country, inshallah ta'ala. And last but not least, join the people and strive for justice. This is what makes life worth living, is when we strive for justice, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh Daniel. We really appreciate your feedback, and involving ourselves in the civic organizations that we have within the community is a must. I know a lot of times, because of politics in the community, we veer away from those things, but these things are set in place as structural things that will help us hopefully move forward in dealing with the issues that we struggle with regarding racism. And oftentimes it's a lot of resistance, because it's a lot of resistance of people participating in the organizations that you mentioned because of the politics that are involved. And sometimes we have to put those things to the side and look at the greater good and the bigger picture that we're trying to work towards. So I appreciate you for bringing that matter up. Sister Lubabah, if you are ready to share your position on this matter for this evening, we greatly appreciate it, inshallah. Otherwise, we can go ahead and move into question and answer. I know we were having a little bit of technical difficulty for a second, so we can move into question and answer for the next segment of the talk this evening. We're gonna jump back to Sheikh Dawood really quickly. Sheikh Dawood, if you could just kindly expound on the matter and just simply trying to help us understand the simple matter of how do we move forward in our ummah regarding dealing with racism, just as simply as you can help us to understand. You know, sometimes we need it in simplest forms to understand. So if you can share that with us, that would be good, inshallah.
Well, I think the first step is that having the proper view of ourselves and knowing our relationship to our Lord. And this relates back to the point that I made about spiritual purification. You know, there was, if we really contemplated our very existence, this would be a great first step in dealing with the issue of racism, at least on the individual level. One of the great scholars of West Africa of the 19th century, Sheikh Ahmadu Bamba al-Maliki, rahmatullahi ta'ala, he wrote in his epic poem, Masalik al-Jinan, he talked about this issue that informs racism. And of course, he was very aware of it because he was oppressed by the French colonialists who had invaded the Senegalese Gambia area. So he wrote and he said that, know that you all were created from nutfa. And then you walk this earth as a sack of feces. And then you all will enter into the ground as a rotten corpse. Said, know that all of you are the children of Adam, and Adam comes from the Torah, he comes from the dust, right? If we just even reflected on that reality, right, that we all were created from nutfa, and when nutfa comes out of a person, this is najasa, right? This is something that's a ritual impurity, right? Then he talked about something else is inside of us. We're all full of you know what. And when that comes out, that's najasa too. And then we all go into the grave, and unless Allah so decrees not to have our corpses decompose, but in general, corpses decompose and they stink during the decomposing process, right? So if you've ever looked at a skeleton, you can't tell the nobility of a person just from a skeleton, or you can't tell whether they are white or black, or whether they're Arab or non-Arab, or whether they were rich or poor by looking at a skeleton, right? If we even contemplate our very creation, our mortality, this would help us a lot in dealing with the issue of kibr and takabbur that informs racism. I mentioned the issue of the brotherhood and sisterhood compact and relates to socialization. Allah Azza wa Jal clearly said in his divine plan that he made us into different ethnicities and different clans. He says in Surah Hujurat, we all know this, right? And shu'ub doesn't mean nation states as we understand it. It's not how those understand, but the Sahaba, this relates to like an ethnic background, relates to lineage. He created us, these differences lead to arafu, that we may get to know one another, right? And it's not to battle each other or to segregate each other, right? And Ali ibn Abi Talib, al-Khalifatul Rashid, he said, "An-nas a'da'u ma jahilu," that people are adversarial. They're adversaries to what they're ignorant of, right? So this goes back to the more of the educational about different cultures and different people in our community, but not just by reading a book, though we should read books, that it should be a level of experiential knowledge, of actual socialization, of spending time with people, of camps, of going to invite someone over to your home for dinner and you go to theirs. You know, if you're in the Muslim community and one of your children gets married, and for the walima, basically everyone looks just like you, except for maybe the sheikh who's giving the khutbatul nikah, then I think you need to reassess how your walima looks. Your walima is not looking right. You need to invite some other people outside of your group, right? And then also, this is the other thing, and I mentioned this thing relating to marriage. One can be married to someone outside of their ethnicity or race and still hold racist views towards the group that the person's married to. But there is something to be said that if people are sincere Muslims, that when a brother marries a sister from another ethnic group, if they're both sincere Muslims and their families are practicing Muslims, this will strengthen the ties between the groups and they become like one family, right? This happened during the time with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This happened when Bilal married the sister of Abdurrahman ibn Auf, Hala, and he was like the money man Sahabi. He was like rich, right? And she was Arab. Salman al-Farasi was Persian. He married a woman from Bani Kinda, like their roots are Yemeni, right? Arabia. Baraka Ayman, radiallahu anha, she was Habashia, and she married Zayd ibn Haritha, who was Arab. So she was Ethiopian, and she married an Arab man, though he was a dark Arab, as Ibn al-Jawzi mentioned, right? So this helped to connect families, and this helped bring about a new type of interactions between people in El Medina when they began to marry each other. So yes, the more similarities, the better. I'm not saying everyone should run out and you're black and you just don't marry black women anymore, or if you're Desi, then you just don't okay, I can't marry a Desi because I have to go marry a Latino brother or whatever, right? I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that this type of tribalism, as we look at marriage in the Muslim community, if we could undo some of that, that would help us out significantly at dealing with this issue as well. And Allah knows best.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Dawud, really quickly, you mentioned a lot of historical factors regarding like more people of color historically, the Sahabas. Where can we find the resources to learn more about them? Because this is something that I'm sitting here as the moderator, but I'm also sitting here as a student and an audience member. So if there's any way that maybe later on we can plug that information, that'd be great, where we can find more information about that. Because I think if we learn it from the context, Islamic history, then maybe that will kind of help us move in a direction we can kind of deal with this issue of racism a little bit more. So if maybe later on you can add it to the chat or something, but if you have those resources, that'd be greatly appreciated, inshallah. Okay. Inshallah, we're gonna move on with Sister Lubabah. Sister Lubabah, we've been anxiously anticipating you, and inshallah, we'd like to welcome you on and get your perspective regarding this issue that we all are struggling with as an ummah this evening. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair, jazakumullah khair. I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties today. But Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulih al-kareem. Again, we start in the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, and we send our praises and our blessings upon his noble prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I wanted to give just a brief bio of myself because I don't really fit in any of the boxes alone. For example, I am Black, so I appear Black. So a lot of people do assume that I'm African American, but my parents are immigrants and they came from Sudan. And so we speak Arabic. And so some people consider us Arab and some people don't. I grew up in a very Desi community where mostly I was the only Black person in a lot of gatherings, and still to this day when we meet with our, whenever I go back home to St. Louis, my family and I are usually the only Black people in that space and in that masjid. My dad was also the Imam, so I am the daughter of an imam or the daughter of a minister, which comes with a whole lot of complexities, especially in our community. So when you tackle all those together, it becomes really hard to figure out where you belong, as well as, you know, how do you respond to what's happening? I'm a mother of 2 children, and my son is he's 12, and so he's still young by my standards. But if someone sees him, he's 5'9", he doesn't look young to everyone else. And so I had to sit down and talk to him and tell him that you are a Black man. And even though you're only 12, even though your brain cells are definitely not anywhere near grown, when people see you, they're going to see you as a Black man, and you have to be cognizant of it. You have to be cognizant of what you say. You have to be cognizant of how you behave. I'm like, even if all of your friends are doing something wrong, and if you're the only Black kid among them, I'm like, you likely will be the one that will not come home. And so having to have that conversation with my son is really difficult. But even more so is the experience as a Black Muslim woman in our masajid and in our communities. And this is sort of where I want to spend a lot of my time, because we know that, you know, in the Prophet's Khutbat al-Wada, he talked about how we are all from Adam, and Adam is from dust, and how there's no virtue of an Arab over a non-Arab, over, you know, a white person over a Black person over a white person, except for righteousness, except for taqwa, right? But then when we go into our masajid, and let me back up. So among racism, there are basically two big types, right? There is implicit and there's explicit. Explicit is a belief that someone holds consciously. It's a belief that I know when I see a Black man, I'm going to hold my purse a little bit tighter. I know when I see a Black man walking down the street, I'm going to, you know, lock my doors, right? That's explicit racism. But implicit are the ideas that we hold subconsciously, are the ideas that we hold that we're not even aware that we're doing. Like being skeptical of someone's scholarship because they're not Arab, right? We have Imam Dawud, an African American. We have Imam Daniel, who is Puerto Rican, right? Some people are going to be really skeptical to get their knowledge from these 2 learned scholars. Why? Because they are not Arab, or because they're not South Asian. They're not from my tribe. And so that is an implicit bias. It's something that we, or the fact that we consider an American-born convert to be less authentically Muslim. Just yesterday, I was on a chat group, one of those huge, massive WhatsApp groups, and this brother had the audacity to call out a sister and assume that she's a convert, assume that she's new, and lectured her about her religiosity, lectured her about her activism, and basically telling her she doesn't know what she's talking about. Astaghfirullah, like this is, and again, the beautiful thing was the response from the community was very positive. They shut him down very quickly and he was removed. So people took steps. So that's beautiful. That's something that's new, and that's something that is necessary. But as a Muslim community, as an immigrant Muslim community, I served as executive director of CARE Houston, and I moved down to Houston about a year ago. So I've had the pleasure of going to many different masajid and praying at different masajid and speaking to people at different masajid. And very few of our masajid are diverse. And even if they're diverse on Friday prayers, they're not diverse with regards to our board. They're not diverse with regards to the feeling that people get. And again, because I speak Arabic, because I understand Urdu, because I look like this, it's great because I can go in and I can actually hear what people are talking about me, right? When I go pray and the woman next to me is talking about me in Arabic, and I'm like, I got you, I understand you, but I'm not going to give you that satisfaction of knowing that I know, right? But this is something that we have got to have these discussions, and we have got to hold ourselves accountable. And again, our shiur spoke about, the arrogance and how this racism comes from arrogance, and that shaitan was the first one to come with this arrogance, with this kibir of being better than Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. So a couple of just really quick points that I want to make are, first, do not be dismissive. If I come to you and I tell you as a Black woman, I'm not welcome in your masjid, don't dismiss it. Or if I tell you that my kids don't want to come into the masjid because you are not treating children well, don't be dismissive of my feelings, of my experiences. Again, if we're not willing to sit down and have these really difficult conversations from a place of respect, from a place of perspective, then we are not going to go anywhere. We're not going to get to where we need to be. And we can quote these ayahs from Surah Al-Hujurat that we're created in nations and tribes. We can quote all these ayahs from the pulpit forever, and we will not make a speck of difference. Like one of the hadith that just struck me really hard when I was preparing for this talk is that our Rasulullah said that there are 4 aspects of Jahiliyyah that are in my ummah that they will never fully abandon, right? So bragging about status, insulting others' ancestry, seeking rain through the stars, and wailing in tragedy. And I was like, Ya Allah, I'm like, Rasulullah knew that this is something. And so what we have to do is do the work ourselves to make sure that we at least are having these courageous conversations, that we at least are calling out our family members, or we're calling out our masajid to make sure that we are cognizant of our implicit and our explicit biases and that we tackle them. The other concrete steps, again, education, learning about each other, learning about our backgrounds, learning about our experiences, our struggling. You know, noticing that Allah said that إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَىٰ وَجَعَلْنَاكُم شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِندَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلِيمٌ خَبِيرٌ. O humanity, we have created you from a single male and female and made you into communities and tribes in order to get acquainted with each other, in order to know one another. And certainly the most honorable of you with God is the most righteous among you. So again, not even just the walima. If your walima is all of your ethnicity, then that's a problem. But even who are you meeting with every day after school? You know, who are your kids playing with? When you're having your, if iftar is in Ramadan, who's at the table? Is it all people who look like you? If so, that's a problem. Branch out. The second thing is accommodation, especially if you are in the masajid, you need to accommodate for others. And this can happen on paper, and this can also happen on a board level, but it can also happen in programs. So if you proactively codify inclusion by amending the bylaws on a board level and saying that we have committed that our board is going to reflect our community. Our community is diverse. It has, 30% African American, it has 30%, Arab and South Asian. You have, 25% Arab, and you've got this and this and this. Our board is going to also look like that. We are going to try our utmost. Our plan when we do our strategic planning, our 3-year goal is to have a board that is consistently reflective of not just our racial, but also our based on our economic status, based on our immigrant versus, domestic born, based on females, right? A lot of boards do not have any women on their board. ISGH, I'm going to call you out. You've never had a woman on your board. You are the largest Islamic organization in Houston, and you've never had a woman on your board. That's not cool. We are 50% of the population. So codifying accommodation, but then also having programs, having regular culture nights in your mosque with the ethnic foods from regions where you talk about the history of that country, or talk about the history of African Americans who are living here. You can show a documentary. You can invite a wider have talks regarding that topic along with the food, right? We love food. You have food, the Muslims show up, right? So have your ethnic food, we'll all show up. You educate them, you show a documentary, you can do and talk about it. And then again, the third thing is making sure that your guests, your home is diverse. The people that are coming into your house don't all look like you. And don't all believe like you. And that's the other, I'm going to throw this as well. If your masjid is just Hanafi and you only pray Hanafi, and your kids have never been exposed to Maliki, they've never been exposed to, Shafi'i or Hanbali or Ja'fari, that's also a problem, right? Because one of the things that we don't understand is that these differences of opinion are a blessing from Allah, but yet we grow up and we are telling our children that, no, you must pray like this, you must go like this, you must do like this. And a lot of times it's not even based in religion. A lot of times it's based in culture. And then the last thing is purification, honesty with ourselves, looking inward to examine our hearts and asking Allah to purify us and to rectify us. And again, this is where we have to start. it will grant us the courage to admit to ourselves the ways racism has seeped into our ranks and to hold others accountable when they underestimate its gravity, right? We know that Bilal radiallahu anhu, when Abu Dhar slipped up in anger, right? Because, and this is Abu Dhar, this is one of the Sahabas, right? And he told him, oh, son of a black woman, right? But what was his reaction when he was called out on it? He went and he put his foot down. He told Bilal radiallahu anhu to step on him, to put his feet in his face, right? So racism is not something that's new. It's not something that is, you know, colorism is not something that is new, that it's just our generation that's facing. But the reaction when you're called out on it is something that is new. That reaction that, oh, I got you. It's okay. It's okay that I talked about you. It's okay that I called you Abd. It's okay that I called you Kalu. It's okay, right? And it's not. And again, if this is among the Sahaba, then again, it's not going to be not from amongst us. And when you talk about the verse from, Surah An-Nisa that I always talk about, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu kunu qawwamina bil qisti shuhada'a lillah walau ala anfusikum wal walidayni wal aqrabin. Oh, you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or your parents and relatives. So we're not even talking about, people who look like you. We're talking about everyone. Even if it's your parents who have done wrong, it is your job to call them out on it. Even if it's your imam who's doing wrong, it is your job to call upon it. We forget that when Umar radiallahu anhu was the Khalifa, he was the Khalifa, and he tried to legislate that the mahr was too high and we're going to limit this, that a woman got up in the khutbah and corrected him. She called him out in front of the whole community. Right? We cannot sit any longer. We cannot sit and shy away from these conversations, difficult conversations, because if we are not having them, we're not going to have any change. We're not going to have any progress. I pray that we can, inshallah, rid our own hearts of these diseases of arrogance and racism and speak out whenever we see these diseases manifested in the words or actions of others, and look beyond our own experiences and recognize that the American Muslim narrative includes people of all backgrounds, all ethnicities, and be brave enough to talk about these issues and humble enough to stay quiet and really listen when others share their challenges so that we can support one another as a united community, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you so much, Sister Lubabah. MashaAllah. I look forward to meeting you one day in person in the very near future. MashaAllah.
Likewise, inshallah.
Inshallah. We're going to open up for a few questions. I know we've held you guys for a long time this evening, but we wanted to open up the floor for a few questions and then wrap up with just some departing advice and takeaways. MashaAllah, Sister Lubabah, you mentioned quite a few things that are very, very important as far as some of the things that we need to be establishing within our community. One thing that has been like a common thing that everybody has touched on is something as simple as getting to know the people in your community, something as simple as breaking bread with them. And I know some of our audience members are very textbook and they will do exactly that, but the conversation won't be had. The necessary conversations at these dinners won't be had. And that's what we don't want to move forward. And they think, oh, okay, well, we just need to sit down and have dinner and have an iftar or whatever the case, when the issue is so much grander than having a meal together. The idea behind that is building community. The idea behind that is building relationships where we can understand one another better and we can appreciate and respect one another better. It's not just sitting down having a meal. So I wanted to mention that for those who are watching and listening, that it's not just about sitting down having a meal. It's about establishing community and learning from one another in these settings. Conversations are uncomfortable. Nobody likes to talk about things that make them uncomfortable. This is a common conversation that we have in our household all the time. But if those things are truthful and they are sincere and they're coming from a place that we want to see betterment, then they're necessary. So we have to take the blinders off in our community. We have to be respectful of one another. One of the things that we often struggle with in our family personally is, my kids who are usually the minority in any academic setting or any setting at the masjid. And they're oftentimes jokes are made, snide comments are made, and not just by children, by adults as well. And it's unfair, it's unfortunate, and nobody wants to talk about it, and nobody wants to address it. But I think I don't think, but I know it's something that we really and truly have to contend with. And I don't know if we'll see it in our lifetime, but inshallah, if our children will have a better chance at it as adults, inshallah.
I was going to say that I think we struggle with that concept of hiding the faults of our Muslim brothers and sisters, right? And so if I'm calling out their racism, am I exploiting their faults? And is that something that I want to happen to me? And that's something I'm going to just give to the shuyukh and let them answer that.
And Sheikh Daniel, I would just like for you to kind of touch on, as a marginalized minority from the Latino community, how can people provide support and empathy? Those are two things that are necessary regarding dealing with racism. How can somebody say, I really want to support the progression of dealing and becoming more knowledgeable of how not to contend with racism? How do we provide the support consistently in our community?
One is in intentional inclusion. Is for us to really be concerned about each other, and even within our homes, like was mentioned, joking. Sometimes racial jokes are made, and nobody says anything. We should stop, and correct these matters, because these jokes were of people suffering. People suffered because of racism and discrimination. So we cannot take that lightly. So another thing is, when we talked about the masjid, we talked about interaction, but also our transactions outside in society. For example, if a Muslim owns a place, right, that sells haram stuff, alcohol and other stuff, right? And I'll give you one story. There was one time I found a young man in front of the masjid after the rising of the sun, right? I was taking my kids to school, and he was sitting in the masjid. The masjid's closed, it's in a remote area. And I asked him, can I help you? He said, I just want to be in the mosque. I said, okay. And he was a white American. And I said, let me take my kids to school and then we talk. I found out that he had some mental issues, right? Something was wrong. So I took him to a place to get help and get evaluated. But first I contacted his mom. When I find out, his mom said, I don't hate Muslims, because he converted, but I don't hate Muslims. But I hate the fact that it was a Muslim that sold them these drugs and made him made him be in that state, and I would never get my son back. So, I mean, that's dealing with reality. You cannot fix that, right? So as an advice is that we are an ummah, as Allah raised our status by saying, you are the best community raised out for mankind. You enjoying what is good and you forbid what is evil. So we should individually take responsibility for ourselves and for what we bring out to society, because we are accountable with Allah for the way we represent or misrepresent Islam. That's what I think. May Allah accept it.
And also, Sister Lubabah, if we can jump back to you really quickly. We talked about a lot of things that we need to do. Can you give us an idea of what we should not be doing? Absolutely, as an ummah, what we should not be doing as individuals. Because like I said, again, some of us we're very textbook, and we'll take things to the literal extent and go out and do everything that we're told. And then it'll last for about, as long as the issue is there on the table. But what is it that we should absolutely not be doing as a community, and if we want to see progression, if we want to be empowered as a community against this issue?
I think this is a better question for Imam Dawud, but I'll just start and then I'll pass it over to him. As far as what we should not do, we should not forget. We should always be cognizant. We should always be bringing this topic up even after the protest stop, even after it's not on the news. We shouldn't forget that this is a essential issue, that if we want to fulfill our Islam to the depth of what we were ordered to do, we have to take this on. We have to focus on it. That's one thing. The second thing is that we should not expect our Black friends or our minority friends to have all the answers. We should not expect them, to send them a text and say, hey, can we have a talk about this? Right now, a lot of Black people are grieving. They're really struggling. I'm struggling. I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with, sending my kids out. I'm struggling with going to the grocery store. I'm struggling with going, driving. I'm struggling because of, and again, the problem is when I go to the masajid, I'm still struggling there as well, right? Because the acceptance isn't there in the mosques that are near my house, the mosques that are, predominantly Arab or predominantly South Asian. And so when you can't find that sakina, that tranquility anywhere except for at home when you are praying to Allah, that's a problem. That's problematic. And so if you are not of that community, how can you help? Make sure that you are reaching out and trying to be a comfort for your African American community right now, as opposed to trying to negotiate and talk about how, these protesters are destroying things, and it's how it's only a few Black apples, and how it's only a few cops that are doing this, or how it's only a few masajid or a few aunties and uncles that are doing this, right? Hear them, and again, listen to them. Have that courage to listen to them, even though it's painful, even if they're telling you that you did this and you didn't mean it, but this was a slight. Even if you didn't mean it, even if you weren't aware of it, but just so that you are aware of it, so that you can move forward and do better. And again, spending that time with yourself to do that work, to think about what are my explicit biases, what are my implicit biases, learn about the history. Learn about the history of African Americans in this country. Learn about the Muslims that were brought here, that were brought here. Learn about the fact that the first Quran that was here was brought by a slave, right? Who wrote it from memory, right? Read about these stories. There's many, many, many awesome books and documentaries that are out there now that talk about the Muslims and talk about, not just Muslims who came in, but talk about African Americans and the struggles that they have faced in this country, and learn about what systemic racism is. Learn that it's not just about, the cops killing African American men and women or children. It's not just about that. And there is a bigger issue that needs to be dealt with. And it's not just our issue. For example, right now, we've got, many, many, many Latinos and Hispanics who are in jails, who are in cells here in Houston on Emancipation Drive, right? Do we talk about that as Muslims? And it's something that I always mention in all of my gatherings, especially with my care work. I'm like, when there is a protest for Kashmir, the South Asians come out. When there is a protest for Palestine, the Arabs come out. When there is a protest for Latinos and for, ICE and immigration, none of those two show up. There's always a handful of core activists who will always show up. But for the most part, our community doesn't show up. We don't care. Even though there are Muslims who are there. And even though when we're told to stand for justice, we're not told to just stand for justice for Muslims or for just Arabs or just Sudanese or just Latinos. We're told to stand up for justice, even if it's against ourselves. Even if I'm the oppressor, I'm supposed to stand up for justice. Even if it's my dad doing it, I need to go and be like, Dad, I'm sorry, that doesn't fly. You can't do that. And it's not fun, but we have to do it.
MashaAllah. And rather than check though, you addressing this, what not to do, since Sister Lubabah brought up the matter of rioting, there are many Muslims who hold the position that rioting is haram, that we shouldn't involve ourselves in it. If you could please share with us the position of Islam regarding rioting and protesting. And I think we're going to wrap it up from there because we will have gone for an hour and a half And I know you guys have a busy evening, and people may even need to make some. So if you wouldn't mind, Sheikh Dawud, talking about the position of Islam in political, peaceful protests and demonstrations, inshallah.
Thank you. Just one quick thing before then, I want to also mention something about my suggestion of what not to do. We need to be very careful about our language. Please stop saying the Muslim community stands with Black people. Why do I say that? 1/3 of the American Muslim community is Black. So there's two things that you're doing in that. It's the continuing feeling of many Black Muslims that we're seen as second-class Muslims or not equal stakeholders in the Muslim community with South Asians and with Arabs, right? That's one thing. Another thing is when we take that type of language outside to the broader public, to the broader society, that also has an effect of otherizing us and otherizing you as a non-Black Muslim from the African-American community. You're otherizing yourself from cultural capital of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, of Malcolm X, of Muhammad Ali, and all of these great figures and intellectuals that are Black, Dr. Naeem Akbar, all these people, right? So we have to get our language right. Now going just back to this, this issue. The Prophet ﷺ said in the farewell pilgrimage, he said, your blood, your wealth or your property, amwal can mean wealth or property, and your honor they're all haram, they're all sacred, right? So we aren't just giving carte blanche because we see other people treating us wrong, that we just have carte blanche just to go and just start destroying public property. Of course not. And of course I mentioned the maqasid of the Sharia, that one of these is hifzul mal, it's protection of property, right? It's a maqasid, but the protection of life takes precedence over that, obviously, right? Qatl al-nafs is one of the great major sins in Islam after ishraq al-billah or shirk al-billah, right? So, but in saying that, I wish I didn't have to answer that question. And the reason why I say that is because the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, "El mu'min a'zamu harramatin min al-Kaaba," that the sanctity and the preciousness of a single believer is more important than the Kaaba. We know the Kaaba is sacred, right? But the Kaaba is brick and mortar. So one believer is more sacred than the Kaaba itself. And we as Muslims, instead of wondering why some people are lashing out in hate and in frustration about wondering why some brick and mortar is being destroyed, our primary concern should be, what about the state-sponsored terrorism that Black people have lived under for 400 years in this place, for not just the killing of women and children or the beating of Black people, that myself, as an African-American in my 40s, college educated, no criminal record, my father's a PhD, and when we go places, every time we see police officers, at least mine to this day, my blood pressure goes up. I feel my chest tighten up. I haven't done anything, just me being in my skin. So you talk about you feel uncomfortable because you about this or about that or about Islamophobia. Imagine feeling uncomfortable every day of your conscious life living here in America, and imagine the effects that has on the trauma that gives people, you know. And ask that question first. I'm not saying you, Sister Taqwaa, I know you know, but for people who come to Black people who are Muslims and saying, well, why don't you say something about the people out there rioting? And by the way, from the pictures I've seen in Detroit anyway, the majority of people are rioting are white folks. They're not even Black. The people that are desecrating Starbucks and spray painting BLM and on the cathedral and firebomb the minority businesses in Minneapolis, including Somali Muslim business, white folks did that. My folks weren't out there doing that. We ain't firebomb anything. You know, we didn't spray paint BLM on the church or desecrate the synagogue in Richmond, Virginia, and put BLM on the Starbucks. We have the receipts, right? We got the video footage and the pictures of these people doing this, right? So maybe you should go to white folks and ask white folks about, should they, you know, do they believe in rioting? You know, I mean, I'm sorry for answering it that way, but please forgive me for sounding harsh to the audience. Please forgive me.
No, no, not at all. I understand your perspective as well, because we see too many times where there's a great double standard where, you know, and they've been posting it as memes on social media, how they protest and react to a winning baseball game or a football game of their team, and they're tearing up the entire city. And, you know, we are frustrated. There is and I'm not sure what country it comes from, and I'm not even sure if it's an accurate African proverb, but there's something that's been floating around that says, when a child doesn't feel the warmth of its village, it'll burn it down to feel that warmth. And I guess that's in regards to what we're seeing with rioting. And we know that there are so many layers to why the riotings are occurring. And, you know, one main thing that we know is out of mere frustration of dealing with the injustices of our system. You know, too many times we are seeing lives lost senselessly because of people who we trust to literally police our nation. You know, the other day, my family was able to participate in a protest here in Houston, where George Floyd is originally from. And mashallah, it was a wonderful experience. And it wasn't even on my radar. My boys who are 15 and 13, it came to them that this is what was going on. And they said, you know, we need to go, we need to participate. And before I took them down there, my husband and I took them down there, we had to make sure that they understood the weight of what they were doing. And they all, mashallah, they had excellent answers. Two of their friends were with them. They had great answers and feedback as to why they wanted to participate. And one of them, their friend, he said, he's just tired. He's tired. And, you know, I want the people who are listening, the other Muslims, I want them to try to figure out or try to understand, you know, how is it that people can just be tired of being tired? This is something that, subhanAllah, you know, from the earliest age of 4 and 5 years old, our men have to contend with people looking at them in a way of contempt, looking at them in a way where they're fearful of them, and they have such disdain for them, all simply for the color of their skin. So we think, but we know it's deeper than that. You know, they're afraid of our abilities, or intimidated by our abilities. But I'm going to wrap it up here with a few takeaways. And if anybody would like to add anything else after, I would more than welcome those things. One of the things that we mentioned as a takeaway is from Imam Daniel. He said to be intentional with our dealings with one another. And I believe Sister Lubabah also mentioned that. So we have to be intentional with our dealings with one another. If we're engaging in conversations with each other at a time like this, let's not let our time and efforts go to waste. And after everything has calmed down, we go back to our own circles, we go back to our own corners. These conversations have to be consistent. And mashallah, we're in Houston, we're in a very large Muslim community, and we get really busy when there is a hot item on the table, but soon as it dies down, we don't hear about it anymore. We're just talking about it amongst each other. We know what we need to do amongst each other, but these conversations have to have a frequent exchange among the Desis, among the Arabs, and even among the Africans. SubhanAllah, there is a complete gap between the Africans and the African Americans here. You know, we spend our entire lives, many of us spend our entire lives trying to connect with Mother Africa, while, you know, a lot of them, they learn a little bit of what's going on here when they're in school, but the connection is not there. But that's a whole nother conversation. We also need to learn who we are as individuals and understand other groups. This is from Sheikh Dawood. He said that we need to learn who we are as individuals, and that will hopefully help us, hopefully propel us, on the opposite end of racism, inshallah. Our third takeaway is from Sister Lubabah, when she emphasized the need for our boards and organizations to be more diverse with various ethnicities that are representative of our ummah, as well as women. This is something that we struggle with so much, which I don't understand, because historically we know how impactful women have been in our religion. But at the same time, in modern day, all we're supposed to do is just sit at home and take care of our families. SubhanAllah, give us a little bit more credit than that, please. And our fourth takeaway is having regular events where this dialogue happens on a frequent basis. Don't let it just be Black History Month where y'all scale across the conversation with posters and images of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. We know our religion is deeper than that. And not to say that these people have not contributed greatness to our society and even our ummah, but we can dig a little bit deeper. So regular events such as cultural nights, where we're exchanging foods and things of this nature, conversation about our greatness and our contribution. And it doesn't just have to be, from the brown and African-American perspective. Everybody has contributed something to our ummah. So we need to have these conversations as well. And our last takeaway is just the purification of our hearts and honesty with ourselves. SubhanAllah, this has been an ongoing theme in my house as well. It's just to be honest, because it's, regarding the matter of racism. When you don't know who you are and your heart is not pure, it's so easy to fall into things that are distracting. It's so easy to get caught up into all kind of nonsense. So we need to purify our hearts and be honest with ourselves, because when you're honest with yourselves and you're honest with the matters that we're dealing with, then it's easy to hopefully, inshallah, eradicate those matters. I'd like to personally thank you all. I have learned so much from everyone here this evening. I look forward to continued opportunities for dialogue and exchange. Inshallah, if you guys would like to add anything else, I'll give you guys a closing 30 seconds. Check it out. Would you like, no, we ain't had enough, we ain't talked enough, I ain't got nothing else to say. But mashallah, you are a phenomenal teacher, as you all are. So we will have the opportunity to post the references that you offered us. Check those. We'll put that on our event page so people can follow up with that. Please, if you guys have anything else to say, check Daniel, do you have anything you'd like to contribute? Closing words?
Yeah, I just wanted to share with Sheikh Dawood.
Oh, mashallah.
SubhanAllah, I just wanted to share that I was doing the tafsir of Surah Al-Imran with my local community. And the narrations about it's a weak narration, but related to the son of Nuh alayhi salam, and how he was the one that Isa alayhi salam resurrected, and that son was Ham, who's called by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam the father of the Black people. So this is amazing too. This is, subhanAllah, it happened that I was preparing the class and I referenced to the book. So alhamdulillah, I benefited so much from Sheikh Dawood, and I really encourage the community to continue to look out for those scholars and imams who are addressing the issues based on knowledge, experience, and then look for references and build your library and build also to continue learning for yourself, for your personal knowledge, but not just to be stuck on the books, also to try to translate that knowledge into actions, into your lives, into your character. So may Allah bless you all, and thank you very much for hosting, inshallah ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu
alaikum. Sister Lubabah, do you have any closing words that you'd like to offer?
No, just Jazakumullah khair for having this discussion. I hope that we continue having it. My just closing comment is that if your masjid is having a talk on racial inequity, if your masjid is having a talk on a topic that is, make sure that your panel is diverse. Alhamdulillah, I'm really grateful that this one is. Make sure that you have women on the panel. Make sure that you have, like, if you're going to talk about Black Lives Movement, I'm glad that, you know, you have a couple of African Americans on the panel. So just make sure that you are representative whenever you're going to panels. And if you're listening to panels, call them out. Call them out if the panel is all men who are talking about, you know, women in the masjid, right? We've been to those panels. You know, make sure that we are that we're calling out our community. I think it's time. Jazakumullah khair.
Absolutely. Okay, Jazakallah khairan to you all. Thank you so very much. Imam Dawud, if you would mind closing us out with a dua, we'd appreciate it, inshallah.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
آمين. آمين. جزاك الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.